Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to Napoli. Welcome to the University of Napoli L'Orientale. Welcome to this beautiful building, the Dumenil Palais, where we have our seat of our rectorate and general administration. Before going on with my speech, which will be, I promise you, a very, very short speech, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the Vice President of the University of Napoli L'Orientale, Professor Augusto Guarino. Please, President.
Good evening, and on behalf of the rector and on behalf of the whole community of the University L'Orientale, I would like, first of all, to welcome and to thank all the colleagues from foreign university who are here in this important conference. And I would like to express my institutional and also personal appreciation for this important conference on this subject, which is a subject which is one of the commitments of our university, and which is a theme of extreme importance, extremely delicate, a huge subject, which, with the help of our friends and colleagues and with the help of the whole community, we are trying to keep present in all our activity. And as I said before, we renew our commitment in this important subject. Thank you, and have a good staying in our university and also in our city.
Thank you very much, Augusto, for being here with us, for manifesting, of course, the commitment of our universities on these issues that we decline in many disciplines, in many interesting initiatives, not only of juridical origin like the present one. I don't know if we have the Vice President of the European Parliament, Ms. Pina Picerno, with us online. Questa è Gabriela.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can. I don't know if you want to show yourself, because at the moment the camera is off. Your camera is off.
Okay. No, my camera is working. I don't know what is the problem.
Non la vediamo.
Entra come. Okay. You can hear me? Okay.
Okay. Welcome, Vice President. Welcome, Ms. Picerno. We are very, very glad to have you with us. Ms. Picerno is from our region, so we are extremely proud of having Ms. Pina Picerno today with us, and to, of course, in general term, to having her as one of the Vice President of the European Parliament. So thank you very much, Ms. Picerno. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear rector, dear professor, dear guests, dear students. Thank you for your kind invitation. It's always a pleasure for me to come back to Naples, especially especially when it is to talk about the European Union. Migration has been one of the greatest challenges of our time. It has always been so, but it has become especially clear in the last years with the so-called EU migration crisis after the Arab Springs. And I would like to challenge this expression. Migration is not a crisis. Migration is a natural phenomenon that belongs to human history. Therefore, as long as humankind exists, migration will be there too. What's the problem of identifying migration as a crisis? The answer is simple. When there is an emergency, we adopt emergency laws, temporary measures, and so on, instead of building a comprehensive and stable framework to manage migration in a way that would both take into account our interest and respect of EU values. Of course, this does not exclude the possibility of an actual crisis happening, but a crisis should be seen as an exception to be managed within the more general legal system with the appropriate emergency tools. When the emergency is over, ordinary rules should be operative once again. My first insight for today is this. We need a comprehensive legal system for migration, and we need to build it having in mind that migrations will always happen. Moreover, we must be aware that migrations will increase in the next year. We should think first about ordinary situations, and only after that we should establish rules for a crisis. Next question is, at which level? For EU member states, the answer is clear. We need a new and a comprehensive legal framework on migration at the EU level. No EU member states can manage today's migratory flows alone. We have seen it with the Arab Springs, and we are seeing it today with Ukraine. Those same countries that did not want to help Italy, Greece 10 years ago, namely Hungary, Poland, and so on, are now experiencing a very, very similar situation with refugees from Ukraine. In this great tragedy of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, at least the European Union was able to rediscover solidarity and to start the discussion on migration again with a new vision. The European Parliament has always been very clear in its position. First of all, as I said, we need to act at the EU level. Second, we need to have a comprehensive framework that respects EU values, including the protection of human rights. Third, we need to take into account the EU citizens' vision. The conference on the future of Europe has been fundamental in this sense. As you know, the conference was a space for debate on the future of the EU so that citizens could reflect on how the EU should develop in the future. Whole panel 4, was about migration. The results are clear. We need to reform the current European asylum system with a new instrument that takes into account solidarity. We also need to give a special attention to minor and other vulnerable groups with dedicated asylum centers that can provide the appropriate care for them. EU citizens also asked for a common EU procedure for asylum that improves reception and guarantees the integration of migrants, for example, by providing language classes. Another vocal concern was the respect of fundamental rights, human rights, and the necessity to guarantee EU standards and values in all times. Apart from asylum, Panel 4 also considered the rights of a permanent resident in the EU. They both asked for an EU system for labor migration and takes into account EU labor need, and they asked for the use of a free trade agreement to attract specific talents that will benefit the EU economy. And I find many of these proposals very interesting and ambitious. The European Parliament has basically the same position, having adopted many resolutions on asylum that ask for a human solidarity-based and common approach to asylum and migration policy. We have also long proposed a common asylum system that distribute asylum seekers among all EU member states. We have called for the harmonization of national laws and for the promotion of solidarity among member states. We have always stressed the need to protect vulnerable groups, including minors, and to guarantee fundamental human rights. So we have the ambition. What we need now is the courage and the sense of responsibility to fund a new whole European Union structure, not only the EU migration legal system. I believe that some things change at last and the Europe will be able to continue in the path of integration. Thanks for attention. Thank you very much, Rector, and thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vice President. Thank you for having spoken of solidarity. Thank you for having spoken of all the initiatives that the European Assembly will try to follow. We, all of us, we hope that the European Parliament will be courage. Will have courage. Will be brave in its institutional relationship with the Council, because any one of us has its own job. And the job of the European Council, of course, is trying to go on with the interests of single governments. But you as European Parliament, you have a very important task as you represent ourselves. So the message, I'm sure, that will be shared also tomorrow, also today and tomorrow, will be please go on with this attempt to give an implementation of these words written in capital letters in the European Union Fundamental Charter and also in the treaties, solidarity, human rights, and so on, because it is the only key to try to keep the Union a unity. Thank you very much for having accepted to be with us, and good luck for your own work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to you. Thanks to you.
I will give a very short presentation just in order to make all of you, but of course the majority is already acquainted with it, of what it is, what is in particular this network. May first of all mention one by one the 10 universities which are in the network, because it is a form for myself to thank all of you for these 4 years of cooperation, of human relation and scientific collaboration, which was very difficult because, first of all, there is the difficulty in keeping together 10 universities, 10 university administration, and the European Union administration. And of course, everything went worse because of the pandemic. You can easily understand how it was difficult to keep together all this relationship, which was intended to be a face-to-face relationship during these difficult years. So, University of Napoli L'Orientale, of course, has been the leader of this network, but we have national and Capodistria University of Athens, University of A Coruña, University Jean Moulin Lyon 3, University of Malta, Universität Innsbruck, Queen Mary University of London, University Goethe Delft Stip North Macedonia, University Sarajevo School of Science and Technology, and Stiftung European Universität Viadrina Frankfurt Oder. Thank you to all the participants, to all the friends, may I say, that have cooperated in this project. Ce l'abbiamo il PowerPoint mio, sì? Vai. Very quickly. Okay, vai. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, rapido. Qua. Okay, so this is a network which was an attempt of ourselves to go on with these activities, which began with the Jean Monnet module, and then a Jean Monnet chair, with a Jean Monnet excellence chair, and then a network, then a center for human rights in the Mediterranean Sea, and then the network with universities I mentioned. And these are the aims, of course. The aims are, of course, scientific activities together with didactical aims. As we live in universities, we have students, we have to transmit all this knowledge to our students. So it was created a special platform on our website in order to host all the lessons that were given by the colleagues in the 10 universities. This is the learning platform, 27 online courses, 270 class hours with all the materials inside, with 100 of you. And these are all, in particular, the list of topics which were treated during the learning activities, and also the events. The events, we had the first events, which launch of these activities here in the same building, in the same room we are now. And thank you for all of you who were there, and yes, and were here once again. Of course, many of you which are of the 10 universities partners, but also the others, Professor Gould, Professor Gooding-Gill, and all the others coming from, which are not involved in the project, but from the outside. They supported us with their experience, with their knowledge, and with their activities. These are the 10 workshops that were organized, one for each one of the universities involved. Of course, yes, everything went very well, with the limitation of having had to organize all this in distance, online, or sometimes with a mixed participation in presence and online. Ecco qua, quindi questi sono i vari poster. Yes, the different poster concerning the workshops, and all of this. Yes, this is the final conference of today and tomorrow, and all of this has been disseminated, has been published online as well as on paper. the first volume, which collected in particular the inaugural, the first conference, and then the others which are all forthcoming. Volume 2 is very, in some days will be published, and the other are all forthcoming. And we really hope, and I really please ask to all of you that will participate in these 2 days of conference, to give us your papers. Of course, we will write to you. We will give you a deadline that will not be respected. We will give you a second deadline. But please, we need for the project, of course, to have also this publication made and uploaded. But also, I think it will be really a pity if all that we will be treated during these 2 days will not receive a full publication on paper in particular. Okay, this is all the stuff which helped me in organizing all the issue, these years of project. I take the opportunity, of course, to thank all of them, and thank you once again. Now I give the floor very quickly for an address by the Vice President of the University of Goce Delcev in North Macedonia, and I really thank him for being here, because it is not of course something which is compulsory, may I say, because there is an important stuff coming from North Macedonia, but his presence, of course, is a sort of testimony of the attention that in particular all the universities, but in particular this university, has given to our project. Please, the floor is yours.
First of all, thanks to all for the warm welcome at your university. I'm delighted to be here on the closing event of the Jean Monnet MAPS project and to congratulate the results of the project. I would like to express my gratitude that the university Goce Delcev is part of the project, and I'm particularly very grateful to Professor Cataldi and his team for involving our university in this project. It's very important for North Macedonia and Macedonian University to be part of such a project, because we are on the cross path in the Balkans, on the Balkan route, and for the last 25 years we have 5 migrant crises. North Macedonia was not a priority country for the asylum seekers, neither was the country for their last resort, but they are just the inflow of migrants is just transitory through the country, but in the end there are some consequences that are humanitarian, political, institutional, economical consequences, not just to North Macedonia but also to the region. This is why it's very important for University from North Macedonia and North Macedonia to be part of this kind of project, because we have a possibility to interact with European partner universities in different activities by participating in conferences, doing research together, writing articles, conducting teaching activities, exchanging good practices, and networking that will help build the capacity not only to the academicians but also to our country through the path to becoming a European Union country member. This project has brought new aspects, new research and debating activities internationally but also nationally with our students. Our students are, as you said, the key of this kind of projects, because later they will be the decision makers in our countries. We all have to overcome the lack of coordination between the academic institutions and the policymakers and the civil society organization nationally and internationally. I'm happy that the project has become a reference point in European Union and has been a great importance for Goce Delcev University and for our country. I will say that we are happy that we are part of the MAPS family. One more time, I will congratulate on the results of the project, and I'm looking forward for the future cooperation because the need of academic cooperation has never been more important. And before I say one more time thank you, I would like to present you with a small gift from our university.
Thank you very much. It is really a wonderful gift. It is in bronze. It is made by an artist who is a relative of one of the North Macedonian staff, and I will keep it as a sign of our cooperation, of our friendship, which will last also, of course, in the future. Okay, so this session now ends here, and we immediately go on with the first session, the round table, concerning how can I say, the state of art. So what has been done so far by the states involved in the project, and what in particular by what has meant the participation in this project by the universities involved. And so 10 minutes more or less each, all the partners, one for or two for university, but not more than 10-12 minutes for each university partner will take the floor in order to testify their presence in the project, the presence of their university, and the how can I say, the evolution from the point of view of practice, from the point of view of jurisprudence, from the point of view of legislation, what has happened in these 4 years that marked the evolution of our project. I will give the floor first of all to the 7 universities which represent the European Union inside the project, and then to the 3 more coming from outside European Union. First of all, I will give the floor to Gabriela Oanta. Gabriela Oanta, she represents University of La Coruña, north of Spain, nearly Portugal, may I say. She's a close friend who has given a huge contribution to our project, together with, of course, José Manuel Sobrino Heredia. And so I have the pleasure to introduce her and to give the floor to her. Gabriela, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Professor Cataldi, for such a kind presentation. It has been a real pleasure for me to be part of this MAPS family. It is my pleasure to give you all some ideas regarding the involvement of the A Coruña team and the inputs and outcomes we have done. Well, during this 3-4 years of activity, I think that the A Coruña team has very much been involved in the MAPS activities. We have participated to almost all the workshops and activities organized in the framework of this network. From my personal point of view, being a member of the MAPS project has represented an opportunity to link my research on EU and international law of the sea with migrations issues. It has been for the first time for me in 2019 to start working on irregular migration at sea. And during these years, I have tried to publish and to participate to the MAPS activities. I'm very happy to share with you that in the coming weeks, months, not many months, I hope, we will have 2 MAPS publications. One is regarding the MAPS workshop we organized in A Coruña in October last year. It was about irregular migration in Europe, a perspective from the sea basins. So it will be published by Editoriale Scientifica from Naples. And I have received very good help from different partners from the MAPS network. And as the second publication, well, in a couple of weeks, I think we will have it. It is my pleasure to share with you the cover of the book. It is a textbook on legal text in international and European Union legal text on migration and asylum. I think it will be a good way to show what international law and the European Union law has made in relation to migration and asylum. And just to finish my intervention, I would like to pay attention to the relevant issue of migration for Spain. As you know, migration from the West African countries to the Canary Islands is a highly topical issue. The Western Mediterranean Sea represents as well a highly topical issue from the point of view of migration. So as you can see, Spain is a key player for irregular migration, both in the Western Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic route. In the following years, I am sure that my colleagues from the A Coruña team and myself will continue working on migration and asylum issues. The MAPS network has represented the first important step for us in this field, but this has been done, and we will work on this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very nice and fruitful days with the occasion of the final conference of this network. Thank you. Grazie mille.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriela, for participating, even if only online. And thank you for your contribution. Now, may I ask to all the other participants to the round table to sit, because I feel alone. Maria, vieni vicino. Stefan? No, come. Okay. So it is my pleasure now to give the floor to my friend Maria Gavunelli, which represents in a very important, very high profile her universities, which is the Capodistria, National Capodistria University of Athens. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. We do have a very brief presentation. I don't know whether we can actually find it in there, just as visual aid more than anything else. It's Gavunelli Maps. Excellent. I can do that from that, isn't it? Correct. Excellent. Thank you so very much. Well, it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, Professor Cataldi, and the rest of the group these past 3 years. I actually realized that we met here in 2019 in the same room. I was sort of, oh my God, there's something wrong here. But there it is, here we are. With quite a lot of work being done, and also, and I think that is perhaps the most important of the things that we have done together, by starting a process. And creating a network is really all about starting a process, and I would like to congratulate you for actually kicking it off and keep it sustained throughout this period, which ended up being a very, very difficult period indeed with the pandemic and all that. You see the names of the team. Two of my team are here today, Eva Zavala and Dimitra Papageorgiou, there in the room. With those two, Marilisa Veftu and Akis Papastavridis, we tried to organize a number of projects together, and we have been working very, very closely on this project and in other projects along on migration and asylum issues. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do anything, even actually being able to be here today. So thank you so much, guys. The work that we have been doing is mostly based on our research center at the University of Athens, which we very modestly call Athens PIL, Athens Public International Law. We engage, this is a photo of our offices. We engage in research. We have a number of projects, including MAPS. We have organized a number of conferences, and these days, innumerable webinars, including the one that we have organized for MAPS, one of the very first ones. And we always have our Nicholas Politis lectures, which is the highlight of the year. We have also organized in that, using the MAPS project, a series of lectures, seminars really, that have also duplicated, if you like, as a training course for all those youngsters who are going to be employed and were indeed employed by non-governmental organizations or anybody else involved in the migration sphere. We started with a series of lectures in Greek, and now in the 2 subsequent years, including this year, we are concluding our series of lectures in English. They have done so well that the UNHCR Athens team has actually asked us to undertake the training of their personnel. And we're very, very pleased to do that, so much so as we can actually promote our scheme and our collective work here. This was the first workshop that we had. It was still early days of the pandemic, early days of webinars. Everybody was feeling sort of weird at the time. It was really a pity that we could not get together and really exchange views and information. But I would really need to come back to that, because that is important. What we have been talking about in Athens was mostly outsourcing, and that was already 2 years ago. And then we had a number of other issues that you see here in different webinars and whatnot. And I was wondering actually how much we have moved in that particular project over the years. And that is also reflected to a number of publications that we have already made within the framework of the context and also beyond the books prepared by the project. And the concern that I have is really something that I have been talking about just this week at the judicial, the National School of the Judiciary in Greece, where we had our very first conference on migration issues for judges as part of their training. It was very interesting to see the issues that we had in our minds in 2019, the outsourcing debate that we had in 2020, and the issues that we see here today. The Vice President of the European Parliament earlier was talking about the member states who really were totally against the process because they had never dreamt that that would be a problem for themselves. And suddenly here they are into that same project. There was a question about temporary protection, and I remember that everybody was talking about temporary protection, something like, I don't know, sci-fi kind of situation. It would never happen. Guess what? It's here. It's not only here, but there are literally thousands of people benefiting from that. In Greece, we already have 67,000 people coming from Ukraine and already part of the system. And they're probably going to stay because they are actually meeting, joining the Ukrainian community in the country. So, and we were also very interested, that's probably the diplomatic term, to hear the Vice President of the European Commission just last week talking about the possibilities of rejuvenating the Pact for Asylum under the leadership of the French, but not really as a global understanding as it was before, but rather as an operational instrument. I don't know what is the difference between the package and the operational instrument. I do know that the world has changed. And I also know that yesterday we had the state of the world environment looked into again, and the situation seems to be extremely bad. If you add to that the fact that we might have food issues in Europe, because the Ukrainian farmers were not able to ensure that we're going to have bread next year. And that all these food security concerns would actually be reverberating around Africa. I do believe that we are looking at a new wave of migration with different, perhaps, characteristics than we had before. And it would be extremely difficult to turn back people who are literally starving. So brace yourselves. I think we're moving into even more difficult waters as time goes by. And because we're moving in difficult waters as time goes by, we moved on to the next thing as well. We realized that there is no major research center in the south of Europe that deals with refugee and migration studies. We all have our bits and pieces together, and we are here to prove it. But there's nothing that is really putting everything together. So we decided in Athens to bring together the law school, the medical school, the political science department, and the media department, and organize a new research hub, which is called the Refugee and Migration Studies Hub. We started just a few months ago, and there would be some information for you out there. You do have a standing invitation to join us. Most of you would be hearing from me as time goes by. We have already started with a series of smaller things, but the big thing is a summer school that we are organizing with the University of Harvard. and that would run from this July onwards. When we first thought about the process, somebody told me that Harvard does not share their name. Guess what? They do. You are all very, very welcome. Thank you so very much. That's for you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Interesting as usual what you say, in particular concerning the temporary protection and these initiatives you mentioned, and also this activity of training judges on migration is something which also here in Italy was created a specialization for judges concerning migration issues. So now we have sections of judges in each appeal court specialized on the issue. Okay, now I pass the floor to another important protagonist participation of this network, Université Lyon 3, my colleague Chiara Neri. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
I think I have a presentation too, if you can, maybe. I send it by email. Just to be, that it will be easier to follow, especially for the explanation on what we did in Lyon during the project.
You have a pen, drive pen?
No.
I can do that.
You send it by mail?
Yes. To this.
Can I borrow it?
Do you have it? No? Okay, but we can do without if it's... Ah, okay. Not a problem. Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here at the end of this very important research project for us. So in Lyon, we decided to have. Oh, you have it. Yes. Yes. We decided to build a team made of researchers, academic in general, like professors, PhD students, postdoc, but also we decided to include in our team people that are already within the administrative system in France to manage migration. For instance, people that are working at the Office for Migration or that are judges at the National Court of Asylum. So it was kind of another way of putting things. We did not organize teaching courses for them, but they actually went to our university to teach our students how things are done in practice, and we could exchange and improve our students' knowledge and improve also their practice. So this is the team. It was 17 persons in total, so that's a big team. I'm very happy that we could rely on that many persons. What we did, of course, 3 series of courses for our students, taught by half academics and half professionals of the sectors of migration in general. And we have organized, of course, a workshop in Lyon. It was dedicated to the judges, to the European judges, in a wide understanding of the judges, because our National Court of Asylum was represented, and they wanted to share their practices. So the book is being published right now, so it's going to be out at the end of the summer, I think. Apart from that, our team of 17 persons also benefited from this MAPS project to issue a significant a number of articles and book chapters. It's 39. I counted yesterday, so I'm kind of proud that we achieved that, because it's a lot. Of course, it's a lot of us too, but still. So that's in a nutshell what we did. And I just wanted to focus 5 minutes on why it was important for us to deal with these kind of issues. Because the project arrived just after the adoption in France of this Asylum and Immigration Act of 2018. And this act was a very important one in France. It was the 28th act adopted since 1980, so it's a lot of legislation in France adopted on migration or on asylum issues. But this one was important because it was very much contested by NGOs, but also by French institutions. The Conseil d'État, for instance, which is not a very proactive institution in France, quite the opposite, criticized the idea of enacting another bill on this issue when we have a lot of them non-enacted already. Same thing for the Défenseur des droits. So I think this coincidence between the beginning of the MAPS project and the enaction of the law was interesting for us. So we included this act within our debates in Lyon. So maybe for those who are not familiar with the act, just a few words. This act aims at reinforcing chosen migration and at the same time reducing not chosen migration and fighting against irregular migration. And to do so, the act is making things easier for the people that France wants, and is making things, of course, harder for those who France does not want to be on the territory. So I put some examples. And I think it's very interesting the terms that are used by French administration. We have something called passeport talent, which is like a passport for talented people. So if you're not talented, then you don't get a passport. It's quite interesting. And within this act, maybe there is one thing that is quite positive, is it gives rights, additional rights to persons in situation of extreme vulnerability, such as victims of violence or unaccompanied minors. But I will say in a few minutes that unaccompanied minors have maybe more rights because they can have their brothers and sisters come to France too if they are protected, but we can also deprive them of liberty. So this is probably not such a progress, yes. And the act is also reducing the length of asylum proceedings. It's the idea that things are too slow and we need to speed up things. And to speed up things, the act reduced the delay for asylum seekers to seek for asylum, for foreigners, aliens, in an irregular situation to ask for asylum. They used to have 120 days to do so. Now it's 90 days. Also, this is something quite problematic. The bill, in certain circumstances, allows France to expel an alien while its appeal to the National Court of Asylum is pending. So this is something quite problematic, especially when we think about the European Court on Human Rights case law. And last thing that I wanted to say about this bill, and maybe you understand better why we wanted to work on it, is that the Act does not prohibit the placement of children in detention centers. And it was something that existed before the Act, but there was a big ask, a big will of the NGOs at the time to request the prohibition of children in detention centers. So the bill does not prohibit it. And we have a lot of problems with that. To give you just an example, in 2013, we had 41 children in detention, according to the Défenseur des Droits. In 2021, in Mayotte only, we have 3,135 children in detention. So that's quite a problem, and France has been condemned for that by the European Court of Human Rights, many times since 2012 and the famous Popov versus France case. The situation in Mayotte is especially problematic. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you, with a perspective that is not very pleasant, I'm afraid, because the recent elections that we had in France for the president showed that the hardest programs on migration were chosen by the people. So we are not on the path towards an easier system for migration management. That's all for me.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Unfortunately, it is not only in France that the wind blows toward this direction. Reading of children in detention, only this sentence is something which really should be eliminated on the perspective of the European Union state members' activity. Anyway, that's why we are here, to try to suggest some different solution to an issue which it is not easy to manage in political terms, of course. Now the floor is to Anna Liguori, University of Napoli L'Orientale, concerning our engagement in this project, of course, out of the coordination activities as one of the 10 universities involved. Please, Anna.
First of all, let me express my deep appreciation for all that these years in the MAPS network gave, since the experiences and the exchange, both on scientific and cultural level, were really amazing. And my only regret is that because of the pandemic, not all conferences were in presence. This is why today I'm really happy all together in this such a sunny day. So welcome to everybody, and also Naples is welcoming you in its best shape. What I'm going to do is really a short update of the Italian situation since starting from our last conference, which was the inaugural conference in September 2019, which was indeed a truly dark period for migration and asylum in Italy because of the questionable, I would say, infamous policies introduced by Matteo Salvini, which was at the time the Minister of Interior, with 2 security decrees in 2018 and 2019. And one of the worst examples of the failure to comply with national and international human rights obligations, as my colleague Adele Del Guercio convincingly wrote. And since then, Italian legislation has changed. There has been a new decree, Decree Lamorgese, which is after the Minister of the Interior, which replaced Salvini. And Actually, this new legislation, the decree has been converted with some changes in a law, gave some improvement. Some of the main shortcomings have been repealed, have changed, but not in all fields. And for instance, the changes introduced with respect to search and rescue activities are not fully convincing. And as several scholars have pointed out, the impression is that the decree still reflects the political will to protect frontiers through the obstruction of search and rescue activities conducted by civil society, and more specifically by NGOs. The major progress were made in other fields, and I will highlight the main improvements. So one of the main improvements with the new decree is that the decree restores a kind of protection which is similar to the humanitarian protection, which the Salvini decree had quite completely abolished. Notwithstanding, this is a very important form of protection granted to foreigners who prove the existence of serious reasons of a humanitarian nature or resulting from constitutional or international obligation. So the decree restores something very similar, which is called special protection, and in addition, it provides for a wide range of permits to be converted into residence permit for work reasons. And secondly, while the previous version of Italian law explicitly prohibited expulsion and refoulement only if this entailed the risk of torture for migrants asylum seekers, the article in question has now been amended and is now providing for a much broader range of cases in which refoulement is prohibited. In particular, the amendment establishes that such measures cannot be adopted when there is a risk of inhuman and degrading treatment, not only torture, and a risk of the violation of the right to respect for one's private and family life. And finally, the new decree modifies the reception system, introducing the reception and integration system, SAI, SAI, similar to the SPRA approach, which had been, on the contrary, significantly reduced by Salvini decrees, although recognized at European level as a best practice to be imitated. And indeed, the return to a model of reception, as prior was, characterized by the provision of an integrated reception with a special focus on the process of self-autonomy and social inclusion of the person, is very welcome, since it is much closer to the real needs of asylum seekers and refugees than the government centers, the CAS, which, on the contrary, have often been criticized as dysfunctional because of the poor quality of services and facilities, and in most cases overcrowded in remote areas and without very distant from transportation. And so far, even if the Lamorgese decree is not without gray areas, we can say that most problematic aspects of Italian legislation have been overcome. However, what remains exactly the same is the shameful, I have no other words, agreement with Libya, concluded in February 2017 and renewed 2 years ago without any changes. And indeed, right from the start, it was clear that the implementation of such an agreement would violate migrants and asylum seekers' rights, as attested by several reports from international organizations. And since 2017, the situation has become steadily worse because of the instability in the region and because of the involvement of the Libyan Coast Guard, which was tasked with search and rescue activity previously carried out by naval units, Italian naval units. This resulted in shipwrecks and violence and abuses during search and rescue activities, and in the return of thousands of migrants to the hell in Libya, and finally in very serious human rights violation. And one of the questions, much debated by scholars so far, has been the responsibility of Italy for migrants' human rights violation as a consequence of the memorandum between Italy and Libya. And pending decisions from international bodies, in particular from the European Court of Human Rights, the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and the CEDAW Committee, and many others, what I would like today, in the few minutes at my disposal, is to draw your attention to some Italian decisions from Italian judges who have already, in clear terms, condemned, stigmatized the unlawfulness of the Italian conduct. So the first decision that I want to mention is Tribunale di Roma of February 2019, which ordered the immediate issue of a humanitarian visa to a Nigerian minor to enter Italy. The minor was in need of an operation, but trapped in Libya while trying to reach his mother, resident in Italy, and the Italian court, in ordering the issue of the visa, took into account, on the one hand, the fact that he could not receive medical treatment, adequate medical treatment, neither in Nigeria, neither in Libya. But above all, he stressed the situation in Libya. One of the reasons, because he ordered Italy to issue the visa, was the systematic violation of migrants' rights in Libya. The second decision is from GIP, investigating judge Trapani, May 2019. This decision was overturned by the Court of Appeal, but finally confirmed by Court of Cassation in December 2021. It concerned a Ghanaian and a Sudanese citizen accused of aggressive behavior and mutiny against the command of the ship Vos Thalassa. And the rebellion, indeed, was due to the fact that the crew was about to send back to the Libyan Coast Guard after intercepting them at sea with more than 60 other migrants. And the court, despite ascertaining the aggressive behavior, acquitted them because it recognized self-defense as justification for their behavior, dictated by the need to defend the right not to be pushed back to a country, Libya, where their fundamental rights would have been put at risk. And finally, the last one from Tribunale of Napoli, our city, October 2021, and in this case, the court condemned for the first time the captain of a boat, a tugboat on duty in July 2018 at the Sabrata offshore oil platform in international waters, to 1 year of imprisonment for having sent back to a Libyan patrol boat off the port of Tripoli over 100 of migrants, including minors, rested near the platform. And the judgment was strongly welcomed by associations as Amnesty International and ASGI, the Association of Lawyers and Judges in Immigration Studies, since it expresses a clear condemnation of the practice of refoulement to Libya. In this case, operated by a private boat, but coordinated by Italian authorities. And in conclusion, although I'm aware that nowadays the focus is more on the Ukrainian situation, my proposal for the way forward is that priority should be given to the rejection of the memorandum as it is today, and the evacuation of migrants still trapped in Libyan detention centers, and the creation of safe and legal ways to reach Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Of course, we experimented in Italy this evolution due to the different governments that dealt with the question of immigration during these last years, and it is important, of course, to highlight the importance of the concept of vulnerability concerning these people, and the attention that, of course, this issue deserves, and, of course, the idea of not considering Libya as a safe place, because Libya is not, for the moment, a safe place where migrants could be end their journey. Now I will give the floor to Stefan Anish. Stefan represents Frankfurt Oder University, Viadrina Europa Universität of Frankfurt Oder. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Viadrina University participated as the other partners in the three components of the project, which is the recording of video lessons, the publications, and the networking component. Viadrina entered the project after having had submitted an own proposal on accompanied minors, on regulation and praxis related to this issue in the city of Berlin. So this was the initial core expertise of the small Viadrina team. We in the video lessons we recorded. We also presented other issues, since of course 30 hours of material is quite a lot, and among them were solely legal topics, mostly about the legislation and the law in action in Germany, but also issues of applied law and also of empirical studies. For instance, the presentation elaborating volunteer work in refugee shelters, its individual, organizational, and relational aspects. I would like to emphasize the importance of recordings, presentations, or publications on issues of law and action, empirical studies, in particular in relation to certain groups of migrants and refugees. Since this kind of information is not easily accessible, just reading the law will not, will in most cases won't give you any answer to how this is actually handled in practice. And so for researchers, actually, this is very important, but also for practitioners or for potential migrants and refugees themselves. Now, in the end of the project, after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, which makes people from Belarus or Russia fleeing their country, and first of all, of course, the Ukrainians, but for the Ukrainians, for instance, this is more or less clear. There is mostly issues of so to which authority you have to apply for certain services or so. This is all not that difficult and should not be a core issue of our project, of course. But as for the Russian or Belarusian migrants or refugees, there is a lot what is unclear, because the the issue of evacuation of these people, for instance. They cannot go to an embassy and applying for visa and then waiting for weeks if they are in danger to be put to prison. And so there's a lot of information or regulation which is made behind closed doors, so in government circles, and so it's very important, for instance, to do research, to ask activists or NGOs which liaise with the government for bringing quick solutions. And that, for instance, we have addressed these issues in the most recent 4 hours of video recording. As for the publications, we made a reader on the German Residence Act in English language. There's a paper of placement of legal guardians for competent minor refugees in Berlin, and I'm also contributing an article to publication of University of Malta. As for of course, we also took part in a couple of conferences. We hosted the online workshop 5 Years Refugee Crisis in 2020 in Frankfurt an Oder. In terms of networking, I cannot express how much I appreciate the cooperation here inside the project, and I hope that we will be able to maintain these connections we have. And if somebody of you will ever have questions related to German law or research in Germany, we would be lucky to help you, or maybe to plan some joint project or publication together. As I said already, we are also networking with NGOs, public authorities on these topics I mentioned, with national researchers and with international researchers, except a few. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your cooperation and for your intervention. Now I give the floor to Peter Hilpold, University of Innsbruck. Please let me address to him a special thank for his cooperation, not only in general terms, but in particular concerning the organization of this event of today and tomorrow, and for having accepted to chair tomorrow a session of this conference. Peter, the floor is yours.
Many thanks. During the project period, considerable changes have taken place in Austria in the field we are discussing here, both on the legal level as on the factual one. When we started this project, Austrian politics and the general mood in the population were heavily influenced by the mass influx of refugees resulting from the Syrian war. 2015, 2016, as we all know, this influx has reached its apex. As a consequence, in Austria, refugee and asylum law was made considerably more restrictive, and also the respective practice and jurisprudence were adapted. On the academic level, and even more so by civil society, these developments were resisted, but with limited success. The government asked academics to write an opinion whether the Refugee Convention of 1951 allowed for the introduction of an upper limit to the admission of refugees. And scholars in Austria were found that were prepared to answer this question in the affirmative, amid strong protests by other scholars, among them me. For some years, the Austrian government claimed a leading role in Europe in the attempt to restrict access of refugees and migrants to Europe. Fortress Europe was a term explicitly used by leading Austrian politicians. At the same time, however, it has also to be recognized that Austria, on average, contributed much more to solve this challenge than other European countries. In the year 2018, Austria had the highest number of asylum applications in the whole of Europe, if absolute numbers are related to the size of the population. The same holds true with regard to the acceptance rate, 44%, while the European average was 37%. Also on the UN level, Austria's restrictiveness in the political attitude towards rising migration flow stood out when the compact on migration was discussed towards the end of 2018. Austria made part of the small group of countries which were not prepared to accept this compact. I published also an article about this issue in the European Law Review, and I try to evidence that the answers are not so clear as they are often prepared in the political discussion. It may be true that this politics was the immediate outflow of the program of a conservative government, but also another perspective could be chosen. Austria had a conservative government exactly because the population looked for political leadership that would implement a conservative agenda within which stronger border controls would be on the top of the priorities. Legislative restrictions went hand in hand with a jurisprudence that mirrored this new orientation. At the same time, however, academia tried to somewhat oppose these developments. One must also recognize that especially the developments of the last years have fostered growing academic interest in Austria for migration and asylum issues, and the number of publications in this field has soared. Strong criticism came from academia as to the relevant jurisprudence by the high courts, which was criticized for being intransparent and not really helpful. In 2019, a federal agency for the assistance and sustainment of refugees was created that should provide basic assistance, but also legal advice to asylum seekers. Criticism was voiced that sufficient guarantees for independence were lacking, as it seemed to be problematic for government officials giving advice to persons seeking help against another governmental agency. And this criticism was first also presented in our Innsbruck lectures. Several factors have contributed to a de-escalation of the situation. This was the agreement between the European Union and Turkey for stricter border controls, rewarded by huge EU payments for refugee assistance in Turkey. We know that the conflict in Syria ebbed down, and COVID-19 made it more difficult to cross borders within the EU and between third countries and the EU. At this moment, we already heard this, nearly the whole attention is devoted to refugees coming from Ukraine. What is surprising is that this time refugees are accepted really warm-heartedly, both by politicians as by the broader public, the whole of Europe, I have the impression, but especially in Austria. And a new discussion has come up about discriminatory treatment between refugees who are welcome and other refugees who are not, even if materially they are in the same position. We will discuss about this issue also here in Naples tomorrow. And now, what was the specific contribution by the MAPS project in this area, beyond these publications we have mentioned before? Of course, we are all aware of the limits posed to academic contributions for achieving societal changes. Nonetheless, at least for the longer run, we can be confident to be able to give a meaningful contribution. Our Innsbruck lessons were held by renowned specialists. We started with Austrian experts in this field, and I think we gave also an incentive to foster academic research in this area in Austria. Afterwards, as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, we started with online teaching units, and this way we were not only able to involve experts from abroad who should not have been able to come to Innsbruck in person. What is more, we thereby were able to reach out to a truly international audience. Furthermore, we came to think about the specific challenges these issues pose to teaching at universities. And it is exactly this area where we would like to continue and to concentrate our efforts. I myself now am concentrating on teaching international law, and we'll publish a large volume about this issue, but we also had a specific area of teaching international migration and asylum law, and this was the title of a conference in Innsbruck. And we would like to continue to work in this field. Although the MAPS project has now come to an end, we are confident that this project will have lasting effects, and we would be very happy if you could continue these activities with the colleagues connected by Professor Cataldi in this wonderful project. So we see this conference not so much as a closure of a very fine and inspiring collaboration, but as the starting point for something new. Many thanks to all colleagues for these wonderful years, and in particular to Professor Cataldi and his team for having launched this project, for having administered it so effectively, and for having brought us together. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your intervention, for your kind words, and thank you for having put the stress, of course, also on the Migration Compact to the present policy in Austria, which is not different from what we have heard by other colleagues concerning European Union countries, and also the figures concerning Austria as, of course, a country with a limited territory. A limited territory, but a huge delegation is the one represented by our friends from Malta, and I give the floor to them with extremely pleasure. The time for Malta is the same as the others, of course, so share, divide it as you prefer, but it is really a pleasure to see all of you here representing your little but very nice and wonderful country. Ivan, please.
Thank you, Professor Cataldi, for this opportunity. I would like first to concentrate about migration in Malta, and then I would like to focus on the project. In fact, as you guys have said, we have a delegation of 5, but effectively this is not even half of the team that were working on the project somehow. I think we were around 12 people working for all full-time academics working on different aspects of the project. As most of you know, Malta is a very small country at the border of Europe. I mean, south of us is North Africa. So practically most, if not all, North African migrants passing over to Italy and eventually even to the north of Europe have to pass either through Malta or through the waters near Malta. So obviously we cannot avoid migration. Initially in the past we were a country of emigration, but suddenly we found ourselves a country of immigration. I mean, not only people from Africa, but people of all over the world. In fact, Malta is very much cosmopolitan. Then there is also the issue of the size, both in terms of territory and the over-densely population. I mean, we are a country of 500,000. We are much bigger in population than Iceland, but our territory is very limited. Just for statistic purposes, 1,000 immigrants in Malta would equal to well over 120,000 immigrants in Italy. So obviously a few numbers will create an upheaval in the society. So obviously the project is of interest not only to academics, but also to students and to practitioners who may eventually become lawyers working in anything related to what migrants they need. I mean, which includes labor law, includes residence permit, asylum, anything that a migrant needs, because a migrant is obviously a resident. I mean, as a de facto resident, so all the issues need to be faced by migrants. So basically the project took 2 approaches. First, the academic approach through teaching and research, and then thanks to my colleague, Dr. Zammit, we have also the law clinic where we teach students practical issues, and most of our clients of the law clinic are actually migrants themselves. So there is also the academic side and the practical side. As far as the academic side is concerned, unfortunately we started a little bit slow. Unfortunately there was COVID and slowed everything down. But basically I can divide our work into two. There were the videos, which are now hopefully are ready, and the videos basically concentrate mostly on migration. But then we also focus on other non-migration issues with a migration element. So for example, if you're dealing with rent, okay, rent has nothing to do with migrants, but migrants may end up renting property. So it's important that, I mean, there is a practical element to it. So even our videos, some at least, may not be 100% on migration, but they will also deal with migration aspect. Then obviously the most important aspect was the organization of the conference in Malta last March. We were last hopeful because we wanted to welcome you without COVID requirements, and some of you managed to make it, and we concentrated on migration and the border area. And now, hopefully, we're going to turn that conference into a publication by 11 publishers in the Netherlands. So we're still waiting some few papers, and hopefully we'll get that job done by early summer. But that was the academic side. Now the practical side, obviously, we had students and academics who were participating in the projects who were actually turning some of the discussions into practical implication. In fact, I would like to invite my colleague to say something about this part for the last few minutes. So David Zamit.
Thank you very much. In fact, the last 3 years, more or less corresponding to the time when the MAPS network was operating, are the years in which we extended the law clinic so that it became a compulsory part of every law student's education in Malta. So at the moment, in order to become a law student, you are expected to spend 30% of your final year working on areas of applying law to practice by helping clients pro bono under supervision. Quite a few of our cases, in fact, deal with migrants and asylum seekers. I want to say that my colleague who is sitting behind me, Dr. Sadek, has also been very active in this area. Some of the cases we've been dealing with have been quite dramatic. We had a case, for example, of a Serbian woman who gave birth to a severely premature child in the hospital, and while she was in hospital, she was served with a removal order. She was living in the hospital, more or less protected by a network of doctors and nurses who did their best to protect her, but obviously it was a very difficult situation, and 2 law students took her case and worked on it for a year. They not only managed to get her residence permit, they also managed to organize her trip to London with her child for an operation which she needed. We had a number of other interesting cases. I'm talking about the ones I was more involved with. So, for example, we had a case of 2 Yemeni asylum seekers, a couple, who left a very, very difficult situation in Sana'a. They came to Malta. The police did not recognize the diplomatic passport which the wife possessed. Her father works in the Yemeni Foreign Service, and effectively imprisoned them. They were then brought out of prison thanks to the efforts of the lawyer for JRS, but then their claim for asylum did not languish until the law students took it up and managed to push it through, so they got refugee status. We've had a number of other interesting cases at the moment. For example, we have a case of a Somali who was who was basically abducted, taken to the Somali mainland from the small island where he lives, and trained to, basically given training to kill Christians by the Al-Shabaab militants. He refused the training, and he was actually attacked by the Al-Shabaab himself, who slammed a rifle into his face, dislocating his jaw. He lost 4 teeth. Anyway, he managed to escape and somehow found himself in Malta. Of course, Somalis cannot travel legally because there's no such thing as a valid Somali passport. And he's got, you know, a team of students who are helping him and his family. We were also instrumental in getting the first Sudanese case of asylum granted on grounds of threatened FGM of the minor daughter of the woman. So there's a lot going on, and I just want to make one final point, that this is very much a win-win situation for everyone concerned. In other words, exactly, the students have been begging us for decades that they want something more practical. So they have the opportunity for something more practical. At the same time, they're learning a lot about the world, and we are all benefiting from it. So, yeah.
Thank you. In fact, as you can see, the project is not only academic, but also practical, and we look forward to having an opportunity to work again in a similar project in the near future. Thank you, Prof. Cataldi. Thank you again.
Thank you to our Maltese friends. Thank you for your contribution that, as you correctly told, is not only devoted to the didactical, the learning part and the scientific part, or also to this in these practical terms concerning the functioning of the legal clinic. This is very, very interesting and very useful for us, and in general terms, of course, for migration issues. Special thanks also to my friend Tonio Borg, because his past experience as a foreign affairs minister of his country, of course, it is a sort of added value to our project. Okay, now until 31 January 2020, we were 8 European Union states in the project, but now we are 7 because the 1st February of that year, Queen Mary, because of the Brexit, became one of the 3 universities out of the European Union in our project. Welcome to, of course, to Violeta Moreno-Lax, but I give the floor in particular to Nicoletta Busuttil, who comes from Malta. Originally from Malta, the Maltese are the majority. If you look to the map of Europe, it's not like that. But if you look inside this room, we have a majority of Maltese, and we are very happy of having them. Okay, this is the point. Nicoletta, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. And you will have seen Violeta, Professor Violeta Moreno-Lax, who heads our team here at Queen Mary. We are, thank you very much for having us here today. It's good you mentioned Brexit, because obviously if we look at our participation in the MAPS project, Brexit did take place during the course of the last few years. But obviously, although it happened legally on a single day, its effects and its ramifications continue to be felt. So what we wanted to talk about over the next few minutes was just give you a little context, what is happening when it comes to asylum in the UK today, how the activities have helped us, the MAPS activities, but also highlight the new center that we have at Queen Mary, which has been created specifically to build on the work of the MAPS project and foster more of a sense of community and research excellence across Queen Mary Law School, with hopefully your participation, as I shall present. So, post-Brexit, we are dealing with a legal system which formally has left the European Union. We have the legal framework of the United Kingdom, which is extricating itself from the impact of European Union legislation. And one of the results of that has been EU nationals becoming subject to immigration control, but also when it comes to asylum, specifically the UK no longer forming part of the Dublin regulation, so no longer having a framework where it can send people back to the European mainland if they have claimed for protection elsewhere. Now, that is just one part of the picture, because what we have, and rather sadly, I think we would agree, over the last few weeks, we have had a new Nationality and Borders Act, which reimagines the asylum framework in the UK and creates significant hurdles for individuals to actually obtain recognition of their protection needs. We can talk about details, but the broad strokes of it are that there is clear, we would argue, incompatibility with the provisions of the Refugee Convention, and it is also being accompanied by a new policy and a new agreement that the UK has signed with Rwanda, where through a memorandum of understanding, a select number of refugees will not be allowed to claim asylum and have their claim processed in the UK. Instead, all of that will be done in Rwanda. At the same time, we have it's not just a proposal to amend the Human Rights Act, but actually a repeal of the Human Rights Act. So the Human Rights Act in the UK is what gives effect to the European Convention on Human Rights. A couple of weeks ago, we have it stated that this government's priority, or one of their priorities, is going to be to replace that Human Rights Act with a British Bill of Rights. So we have a clear framework where we have disengagement from European law, yes, as a result of Brexit, but also one where we have significant issues and apparent disengagement with international human rights law and international refugee law. But even at the domestic level, because of the new provisions of the Judicial Review and Courts Act, we also have attempts to limit the scrutiny of the administration. So the asylum and migration system in the UK would appear to be facing problems from multiple sides, on multiple fronts, and this is the context that we are working with. So over there, that's just a little map to remind us that Rwanda is not exactly close to the UK. So when we are speaking of individuals being transferred, okay, it's going to be a proposal that is not only in clear violation of international human rights obligations, but also one that is manifestly unworkable. Sorry. It's also coming on top of government attempts to formalize pushbacks, this time to Calais. Yes, the plans were changed and withdrawn at the last minute, but only after legal action, strategic litigation had started. Finally, with a view to context, we have a clear discrimination, differential treatment that is being made when towards refugees who actually do make it on the territory, depending on the route that they took to arrive in the country. So if someone arrives irregularly, there is a two-tier system of protection. The very fact that you arrived in means not sanctioned by the UK government will determine the rest of your journey in the UK, not just for refugee protection, but also in terms of the rights that you are entitled to. So how does this frame our MAPS participation? Well, it's really lovely to see some familiar faces who attended our conference online, yes, in 2020, where we had started speaking about the responses, the hostility that refugees and migrants are facing in Europe, and where we took the opportunity to problematize some of these questions, particularly those relating to the interaction of legal regimes, be it at the international and the European, but also how this shift away from protection will impact vulnerable individuals or individuals in particularly vulnerable situations. And we took that as the starting point to formalize it into two special issue journals. So they are forthcoming, the International Community Law Review special issue, which will focus on this interaction of legal regimes, and another one, the International Journal of Law in Context, which will focus specifically on the issue of vulnerability. Of course, this is not the end of the story. We are very grateful for how the MAPS participation has enabled us to build this knowledge base, to share it on an academic basis, but also with our students. But we wanted to keep this going. So we have a new center created at Queen Mary, this Borders, the Center for the Legal Study of Borders and Migration, which officially started. We had our first event this week on Monday, where we hosted the book launch of one of the book launches of the Oxford Handbook of International Refugee Law, where we spoke about access to protection and externalization, but which is just the first in a number of events that you are all very warmly invited to, and that we would really like it if you contributed to as well. And as you can see, the themes that we have chosen for those events are themes that have emerged from the participation and the work that we have done on the project, primarily focusing on issues relating to externalization of asylum and the challenges in access to protection, the impact on individuals in particularly vulnerable situations, like refugees with disabilities, but then also to remember that whilst the UK might have left the European Union, we still have a lot to learn from our European colleagues. So we will also focus on the European angle to consider the EU external borders for our final lecture of the year. I leave you just with a reminder that if any of you are interested in joining the center, we also run a visiting scholar and external affiliate program. You are very much invited to get in touch so that we can host you at Queen Mary and continue our collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. It is not a surprise to see how many initiatives are at stake in Queen Mary universities due to the continual commitment of all of you on the issue of migration and asylum questions. You spoke of externalization. I think we have all to be ashamed of this policy of externalization, of course, not only in the case of the United Kingdom, but also in all the cases, Italy, for example, for what concerns Libya, European Union for the statement with Turkey, and so on. It is a sort of getting rid of responsibility, and of course, it is against the idea of and the texts of the European Union in general terms. Now I give the floor to my friend who represents a very important example, a very important, how can I say, history in migration issues, the history of Bosnia, and in particular the commitment of University Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. So thank you very much for being with us also in this case. You know, it is not very simple for friends coming from these countries to reach Napoli, because we are close, but sometimes you are obliged to pass through Frankfurt or London, or and there are not very close connections. So it is an effort by your that really we appreciate a lot. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Professor Cataldi, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maja Savic-Bojanic, and as Professor Cataldi said, I come from Sarajevo School of Science and Technology from Sarajevo. I will first give you the overview, which is going to be very short, because I come from a country that is very lazy in terms of adjusting its policies to European Union standards. So in the past 3.5 years since we've been doing this project, not much has changed. And actually 3 years ago, this conference, I spoke about the legal policies in Bosnia and Herzegovina as regards migration and asylum seeking. And pretty much I will tell you the same thing today, so that's not why I'm going to focus on that. Rather, I'm going to speak about the activities which framed our participation in the project. And really, we relied on this lazy background, legal background, contextual background of our country, and pulled out the lessons. I spent hours in field trying to come up with the major problems that we are experiencing and what are some of the aspects that are not covered under the very poor legal framework. So, but I will come to that later. So in 2019, when we started this project, we initiated the project with 7 professors. But that same fall, all of them pulled out because our department, which is the Department of Political Science and International Relations, the management decided to phase us out. So I was the only one left doing and working on this project, but I said I'm staying with this project. So thank you for the whole team of MAPS for being patient with me and waiting for me for the lessons, but we managed to do it. In regards to this and all the challenges that are faced by my country, I decided to create a new course entitled Transnational Migrations, Challenges and Blind Spots, which I created. We also got the course accredited in the United Kingdom because I come from a university that offers double degrees with the University of Buckingham in the United Kingdom. So we also managed to accredit this course in the UK, and we had 30 participants enroll in this. And 4 of the students managed to get an internship because they did get interested in the field of migrations with the IOM and the Danish Refugee Council. I also published a work on solidarity because solidarity with illegal migrants in Bosnia and Herzegovina is a major challenge. It is also a security threat because of many prejudices, and we are not a destination country. Obviously, we're a transit country, but the local public is very wary about migrants, and so I researched a lot about this and published an article in the Journal of Balkan and Near Eastern Studies published by Taylor and Francis. I also wrote for the last, or actually for the upcoming publication that is coming under the auspices of the book edited by my dear colleague Gabriela Oanta. We also organized under the umbrella of MAPS and the Mediterranean Forum, which is organized at my university for 2 years in a row, a panel on migrations. The first was about legal implications, and we had Anna and Gabriela speaking at this conference. And also last year we focused on the health challenges of migration, actually migrants receiving healthcare in our country. Participated in all workshops apart from one. We also organized in February of this year a conference on immigration and emigration in Bosnia and Herzegovina, also under the MAPS auspices, which had as its final outcome the education of stakeholders who are dealing with migrants but often don't know how to report on them or don't know how to approach them. And due to a lot of in-field research and what can we, and the internal question, what can we get out of MAPS, I realized that through all of this field work that the major threat to the country was the fact that we did not offer them their basic human right, which was access to health. They were not treated at our hospitals or any healthcare facilities at all. So I decided to really focus my work on this. I got engaged with the IOM and the Danish Refugee Council and put together a project proposal entitled European Union Public Health and Migrations, which was granted funding under the Jean Monnet module scheme. So now we have that project, and for the first cohort of this course, we managed to engage 70 students who will be finishing the module in September. We will also this summer organize a summer school under the auspices of our EUFAM module and continue the cooperation with some of the partners from MAPS also, obviously, but also the IOM and the Danish Refugee Council, and also submitted a Horizon 2020 transformations project proposal, which precisely deals with the push factors from Africa and people who want to stay in the Balkans. So with that, we kind of framed all the the learning, the lessons that we got from this project, and the opportunities that I, as a person, as a person involved in academia, am working on. So thank you very much again, everybody, and for being patient, first of all.
I have to express my special thanks to Maya, because she really participated into this project with a lot of commitment, passion, and we have had also some nice evening together, talking when we had the possibility to meet face to face. Last but not least, Anna, our friends from Goce Delcev University of North Macedonia. We have already had the presence of the vice president, the vice rector, and it is also in this case a huge delegation, not as Malta, of course. Malta is the first one, but anyway. It is really impressive, and also to them really my expression of thanks for their patience, for their emotional how can I say, participation, and also for the quality of their participation. Thanks to Anna for having accepted also to chair tomorrow one of the sessions of this conference. The floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Professor Cataldi, and to all the Italian team of the MAPS project. We are really, really, really delighted and really happy to have been part of this great project, and to meet so many nice people, and not also from the University of Orientale, but also from the other universities, which during the time they have become our close friends. Let me introduce today what have been our results and our achievements of the University Goce Delcev from Stipen, North Macedonia. So generally we start with a research team of 5 members, but within the years we have enlarged this research team up to 9. Where the core members of the group are here present. Here is Olga Koshevaliska, she's the substitute, and Elena Maximova, who have very much contributed to the outcomes of the project. But this is, generally these were colleagues from the Faculty of Law, but we had also one, for example, colleague from the Military Academy, so he had also, they had a great contribution. Well, concerning, let's say, the outcomes, the publications, what have we done in the past years? So generally, we have published 4 publications, 3 to be exact. One is forthcoming, so it should be published in late June. So these are publications where we have engaged research, part of the members of the research team, but also students who contributed with their papers. And of course, we had also interacted with other members from the Art Academy of our university. So there are also interesting contribution of art papers, of art posters within these publications. Other than this, we had published, the team has published 17 articles in different publications or papers in different journals. We have participated more or less in 27 conferences, between conferences, seminars, and other international workshops, or national, of course, depending on the subject. Every time they were on the main subjects of migration and asylum, even though we were focusing more on outsourcing and cooperation, because we do not have a direct, we are not directly involved with the EU system. Other than that, we have elaborated 30 lessons. Within these lessons, we have engaged 17 different lecturers, which are, well, most of them are coming from the Faculty of Law, but there were also some experts and practitioners from international organizations or local NGOs that gave really pretty much pretty good contribution to the substance of the lectures. The other important thing that this project has, sorry, I should go, maybe, no? Okay, if you could go just one slide. Yes. Okay, so I will stop these. These are some of the activities that we have made. So the most important thing maybe that the project has given to us was establishing networks. So it was networking. In North Macedonia, we established networks with a couple of NGOs. Those are the Macedonian Young Lawyers Association, which basically give legal assistance, free legal assistance to migrants and asylum seekers. With NGO Legis, which is a humanitarian organization on the road that helps migrants on the road. Then we have established cooperation with the UNCHR. We signed a memorandum of cooperation, so we are going step forward on our cooperation. And of course, we have established cooperation with the IOM. Here, I have to mention also our, obviously, national institutions, even though they were not very fond in establishing such cooperations, but nevertheless, we managed to do something together. The most important were the projects that we have, in which we are participating outside of the MAPS network. So, for example, here is also present Professoressa Teresa Russo, who engaged us in her project on European Union cooperation with Western Balkans in justice and home affairs. Then another project, who is also grew from the relationships of Orientale, is the project with Giorgia Bevilacqua on HuMarsi SpaceNet, to which Chiara also took part in safety and security of migrants at sea. Also other projects, yes, of course. What was the impact upon students? Well, maybe the most important impact upon students was their interest and their engagement in 2 moot courts that we have conducted under the leadership of Elena Maximova. So, in fact, the last moot court, which was on, correct me if I'm wrong, transgender protection of asylum seekers with transgender identity. So we won the 3rd place. So congratulations to that. And of course, what is the impact upon national policies? Well, first of all, the impact will be raising awareness between researchers, since we as researchers haven't had a close, look in European politics, in asylum and migration. So this was actually an excellent opportunity to get to know what is the European policy in asylum and migration, and what could be the possible impact upon North Macedonia and upon the Western Balkan countries, because we are in the process of European integration. So this was very important. All the results and all the achievements that we managed to achieve, to have at the end of the project, surely will be used in somehow, in some manner, in the future. Our collaboration, our work, our research, our cooperation with institutions, but with other colleagues from the network. So basically, in a nutshell, this is more or less our impression of the project. Thank you very much, and again, thanks to Professor Cataldi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. With this intervention, I declare closed the round table. We have more or less given the framework and the main content of what has been our work and our output, and in general terms the situation concerning our countries in these years, during these years of the project. Now we change perspective, because we look forward. We try to imagine the future in a moment with Professor Hathaway, and tomorrow with the 2 sessions. But now it is the time of 10 minutes of break. So we see, yes, there is a coffee break, and we meet again in about 10 minutes here, okay? Thank you very much to all of you. Please take a seat. Thank you. So, there is no need to introduce Professor James Hathaway to all of you, to all colleagues who are interested in migration issues. I only remind you that Professor Hathaway comes from the University of Michigan Law School, and for us, for me, but for all the 10 universities involved in this project, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have his presence here and to have him begin this second part, may I say, of our works devoted to the future in a certain way. As for me, it is the first occasion to introduce such a leading professor, important colleague coming from the United States. I want to confess you something which belongs to my youth when I was a student at the high school, at the Liceo, and I played the guitar with my friends. And we used to play songs, yes, Italian songs, but also international songs. And as we were committed from the political point of view, as all the students at 16, 17 years old, we were fond of some songs which also tell us about migrants and refugees. For example, Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez. So there is a song, 1918, from Woody Guthrie, which used to be sang by Bob Dylan in particular, but also Joan Baez, Deportee. And I only want to read you just 2 lines when it says, "Adios mis amigos, Jesus y Maria, you won't have your names when you ride the big airplane. All they will call you will be deportees." It was really a beautiful song, and we were all committed. Of course, I didn't think at that moment that I will make law studies, but in the future. But as a student, I was really impressed by this song and by this word. So it is very important for me today, at my age. I don't tell you my age, but I'm a young professor. Of course, Jim too, of course. We are both young professors. It is my pleasure to have with us today James Hathaway, and the title of his lecture will be "Refugees and Asylum Seekers Regimes, the Way Forward." Please, Jim, the full...
Well, I hope nobody thinks that I'm going to try to come close to Bob Dylan, because it definitely won't be that. And I must say, I'm very grateful to Professor Cataldi for the invitation here. When he first approached me, I thought that perhaps I was an odd choice. Your work has obviously been focused on the regional level and trying to find regional coherence in protection. The last 40 years, I've really worked pretty much exclusively at the global level. And he said to me, nonetheless, that he wanted some reflections on the big global picture of the refugee regime that might inspire your conversations tomorrow. So we sort of squeezed this in between my teaching in Tbilisi yesterday and in London tomorrow night. I apologize I won't be with you for much of tomorrow, but the idea would be to think a bit about the big picture. And as I did, I must tell you, to my own surprise, I came back to regionalism. So I'll leave you with that and then offer you some sense of some very general and tentative thoughts about the future of refugee law at the global level. Now, the title I've actually given the paper is The Delegalization of Global Refugee Protection, the movement of that regime out of law. And because I'm a lapsed Catholic, I tend to do everything in threes. So I'm going to suggest to you three things that I think will not change at the global refugee level. And these are three big problems. And then, at the hope of being simultaneously optimistic but realistic, three things that I think may be worth pursuing even in what seems to me to be a truly horrific global protection environment. So let me start with the beginning then. The first thing that I think will not change is what I've labeled the politics of non-entrée. And let me just be clear what I mean by this. I don't mean brute deterrence. I don't mean the physical pushing away of people or boats. I mean the combination of states continuing formally to participate in the international refugee regime, coupled with legal barriers that actually, as a practical matter, stymie the ability of refugees to claim the rights that in theory are on offer. In other words, it's using law to avoid law. And that is a tactic that I think states have perfected. We're all familiar with many of the tactics: visa controls, carrier sanctions, first country of arrival rules, safe third country rules, even the excision of territory. These have been with us for some time. Despite the fact that UNHCR and some other wishful legal thinkers proclaim non-refoulement to be customary international law, in my view, flying in the face of masses of contrary state practice, the truth is that both developed states and an increasing number of poorer states that have the capacity to resist unwanted refugee flows will continue to do so. But they will increasingly do so in ways that are legalized rather than simply in the blunt deterrent sense. As you'll all be aware, courts, in particular the European Court of Human Rights, have, in my view, been champions on the blunt deterrent side. But as the recent case of AA against North Macedonia makes clear, even that court, which we may have thought of as a friend of refugee protection, will not stand up for the unimpeded access that the Refugee Convention requires, at least if the deterrence is legalized rather than being done through blunt, physical, brutal enforcement. So that, I think, is an avenue that states will continue to pursue, and more states of the global south will join states of the global north in that regard. The other thing that I think will continue is the pattern of non-accession to the UN Refugee Convention and Protocol. As I suspect everyone in the room knows, 44 states, 1 in 4 countries in the world, still stands outside the global refugee regime. And that includes 5 of the 10 most important refugee-receiving states: Jordan, Lebanon, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Turkey. This is a very tragic evolution, it seems to me, in the role of UNHCR, which has as one of its primary responsibilities bringing states inside the tent of international refugee law. Yet, over the last decade, they succeeded in bringing only 1 state, South Sudan, on board. The pace of accession has effectively died. What this means is that even if a refugee is able somehow to get through the barriers to access they increasingly find themselves being treated outside the bounds of refugee law, at best as the objects of discretion, and far too often as entitled to absolutely nothing. What I've learned in my dealings with the number of southern governments that I've had the pleasure to work with is that, quite frankly, non-accession to the UN refugee regime is a profoundly sensible domestic policy. After all, why would any state that views itself as exposed to significant refugee flows bind itself to grant refugee rights when the world community obligates it to provide them with essentially nothing by way of guaranteed support? The third negative that I think will continue is closely related to the second. This is the failure of the world to complete the global burden and responsibility sharing project that the drafters of the Refugee Convention envisaged and mentioned in the preamble to the treaty. They envisaged a three-part regime: a common definition of who is a refugee that none of us could change, a detailed catalog of refugee rights that we would all respect, and a system that would enable all states, wherever located and however positioned economically, to be in a position to live up to those obligations. The drafters knew that until that third piece was in place, the promise of the Refugee Convention was simply not realistic. If, as at present, accidents of geography determine most of the protection responsibilities in the world, it is a profoundly logical response for states to avoid protection responsibilities, especially if their own circumstances are dire. Here we are, 70 years after the coming into force of the Refugee Convention. We still have most of the world's refugees living in its poorest countries. We have nothing more than dribs and drabs of poorly timed discretionary money going to those inadequately resourced asylum states. And worst of all, 75% of the world's refugees are stuck in difficult places for on average 20 years or more with no prospect of a solution in sight. To have failed to actually garner the political will to move beyond vague promises of support to a binding regime of burden, meaning money, and responsibility, meaning people sharing, is a travesty, especially when we had the political moment 5 or 6 years ago. And yet, despite that moment of awareness in the global north with the arrival of Syrians that they too might actually encounter unmanaged flows, despite that political moment, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees was able to offer nothing better than its so-called Global Compact on Refugees. By the way, note the label, not a compact for refugees, a compact on refugees, which contained not a single binding obligation beyond the duty of states to get together and talk with each other. I've argued that this is a global cop-out on refugees. It is not worthy of the name a global compact. It did nothing to ensure justice for poor receiving states, much less to produce practical solutions for refugees. And this political fungible approach is quite frankly appealing not only to the powerful states that we as academics and advocates traditionally blame, but it was also very appealing to a UN refugee agency keen to stay relevant and funded without having to do any controversial work. Now, the analytical thread that links these three things that are unlikely to change, non-entrée, non-accession, and a preference for no more than vague promises of support, is what I call the delegalization of the refugee regime. While the Refugee Convention and Protocol will, I think, continue to be trotted out and bragged about whenever it's expedient to do so, they will not, in fact, define the day-to-day reality for most refugees, which will instead be shaped by politically malleable considerations. Yes, there are going to be moments of interest convergence that enable protection, the reception of Ukrainians being the most obvious recent example. But at its core, I think that the vision of a global refugee regime predicated on a binding legal definition, a clear catalog of rights to which all refugees are entitled, and a system to ensure the practical implementation of those norms, I think that vision is likely to continue slipping away from us, yielding to a world of discretionary responses. So now that I've completely depressed you, what should we do about it? And I'm not suggesting, as beautiful as it is to stare out at the ocean, that we all just take a flying leap and end our efforts. But I think we do need to be realistic. And this, quite frankly, is a conclusion to which I've come with great heartache. It's not where I want us to be, and it's not where we should be. If UNHCR had had the gumption to show a bit of leadership with the Global Compact process, my discussions with states of both the rich and poor varieties suggest we might have ended up in a very different spot than we did. But the agency completely, in my view, failed the future of refugee protection. Given that miserable place where we've ended up, I want to offer you 3 ideas for things that we might try. And I'm going to start with the easiest and work toward the one that I think is most challenging. None of these, and I want to be clear about this, I view none of these as ideal. I don't think ideal is within our grasp anymore. So the first thing that I think we can do to at least save some sense of dependability in the refugee protection regime is to focus our efforts more locally, both in formal regional regimes and in what I call interest convergence groups that I'll explain in a moment. It gives me no small amount of sadness to confess that I increasingly see the salience of concessions made by leading human rights scholars like Michael Ignatieff, that the interest convergence on human rights at the global level is necessarily very thin. The thinness of the global consensus means that the prospect of universal refugee responsibility sharing, that is, the human sharing, that is, in other words, really admitting people as refugees all around the world based simply on their need, I think the prospect for that regime is increasingly bleak. Despite the strong aversion that I suspect and hope that many in the room will have to the kind of statement you see on the screen now from the former Danish immigration minister, despite the truly horrific nature of that kind of thinking, I suspect that her words are simply the ugly tip of a very deep-seated social iceberg. On the other hand, despite the antipathy to global human responsibility sharing, it is, I think, undeniable that we have seen significantly better responsiveness at the regional level. Think, for example, of the massive number of Afghans taken in by Pakistan. Think of the millions of Palestinians living in Arab states for more than half a century. More recently, think of Colombia reaching out to more than 1 million Venezuelans with permanent status. And of course, think of the quick rollout of temporary protection by the EU for Ukrainians. In short, shared ethnicity, shared politics, shared religion, shared history, or some combination of these, seems, again, it pains me to say this, but seems to play a fundamental role in enabling ready access to physical protection. This is a very confronting thing for a globalist like me to concede, but I fear that human society, as Ignatieff has written, may simply not be sufficiently evolved to see all refugees as equally worthy of inclusion based simply on the reality of their predicament. Now, that said, this need not be a recipe for an apartheid-like endeavor, at least if we build beyond the purely geographical notion of a regional group to what Alex Neve and I termed interest convergence groups. The idea is that shared history, for example, that binds former colonizers to the states they once colonized, or linguistic or religious affinities that straddle geographical regions, these may be the basis for human responsibility sharing in a way that replicates that at the formal geographical regional level. The simple point, though, I think, is that we need to move towards some realistic notion of the answer to the responsibility sharing challenge if we are going to keep asylum alive. If we maintain an absolutist position that it must be global or nothing, I think we will simply see many dead refugees. The current allocation of protective responsibility based completely on accidents of geography, with 10 nearly all poor countries hosting the majority of the world's refugees, is simply not sustainable, especially as the national deterrent capacity of first arrival states increases over time. Think, for example, of the fact that even Pakistan, which for so long maintained a more or less openness to Afghans, has now erected a 2,600-kilometer fence along its border with Afghanistan. Put simply, regional or other interest convergent sharing is better than no sharing at all, and that's where we are right now. And I think we need to get realistic about the context within which human sharing can happen. The second point, again, moving up in terms of aspiration, asking a little bit more, but I think still realistic. I think those of you who have followed my work know that I've made it a point always to be extremely hard-headed about realism. Arguing for something because it's beautiful may make us feel good, but it doesn't help refugees. I think it is possible still to have a global burden in the sense of financial sharing regime. I think this is an easier sell to states than is the idea of a global human responsibility sharing mechanism. It's a more straightforward contribution as it has fewer domestic political risks than does the immediate admission of people. And if a global burden sharing regime is properly conceived, in particular if funding is linked to respect for refugee rights, as it should be, it could be a protection-enhancing mechanism for refugees, in addition to its obvious core goal of advancing interstate equity. The current system, in contrast, under which rich countries spend 4 times as much every year to process the claims of just 15% of the world's refugees, 4 times as much as is available to fund the needs of the other 85% of refugees in the global south, is simply a very bad way to spend available resources. This leads to my third, and I will concede most optimistic, ambition. I believe it is still plausible, but I don't believe it will be easy. And this would be to add at least a modest layer of human responsibility sharing to the core of regional or interest convergence group responsibility sharing. drawing on the international environmental law norm of common but differentiated responsibility. We might, for example, imagine states outside regions of origin at least agreeing to significantly increase their resettlement caseloads. And I'm not talking about moving from 50 or 100,000 to 200,000. I'm talking about moving into the seven-figure dimension. That this is a role at a human level that fits quite nicely with what we say we are able to do. And by the way, you know, the 1.65 million asylum claims made in rich countries each year may not be the best expenditure of funds. The 1 million resettlement places that might be aspired to, it seems to me, is a much more useful way to contribute to the global regime at the level of ethicality. If we were to move out of the purely discretionary approach to resettlement that we've had so far and see it instead as it should be, as an integral part of the protection process, then the lives that have now been put on hold for decades might ultimately be able to be regained. I think this is a potentially manageable part of a shift at the global level because it would be organized, managed, administratively straightforward for states. Rich states hate chaos more than anything else. This is a way of nodding in the direction of convention duties, as well as a very practical way of ensuring that states and regions of origin keep their doors open to those who need to flee, which is clearly in the self-interest of rich countries. So a couple of quick points before I open the floor to your barbs, slings, arrows, despair, choose your adjective of your views. I want to be clear that my advocacy of global burden sharing, and especially at least some auxiliary level of global binding resettlement, runs up against the third concern that I already mentioned to you, that states prefer only vague promises of support. I understand that. My reason for nonetheless believing that it is possible is that guaranteed funding might be seen to be a smart investment in promoting protection elsewhere, and resettlement as a limited form of global responsibility sharing could be seen to be both a de minimis and manageable way of participating in the global enterprise. But the second and more fundamental angst that I want to put on the table, and again, I am grateful to the many of you who have followed my work over the last 4 decades. You will know that this agenda is not what I believe in. I think it is a tragedy that we have ended up at this spot, where perhaps the best that we can hope for is core responsibility sharing within regional or other interest convergence groups, coupled with global burden sharing, and at least targeted, dependable, residual modes of responsibility through resettlement. I think this is a far cry from where we should have been. It is nowhere close to the comprehensive model for global reform that many of you will know my reformulation team developed a quarter century ago. I want to be clear that I do not resile from the global reform project that I have promoted all of my professional life. As a matter of principle, I believe it remains the absolutely correct way to go. But I think it would be implausible not to recognize the reality that the UNHCR's global compact process has effectively conceded defeat on the broader agenda even before it was formally launched. That's simply the place that we are at. So to conclude, I think we are entering a space in which the least bad option may be to insist on the value of a relatively thin but clearly binding universal legal net that supports a stronger legal protection regime embedded in regional and other interest convergence groups. I make this proposal to you acknowledging in the spirit of Voltaire that the perfect is often the enemy of the good. It does not give me any pleasure to do so, I must concede. But I think that a world of interlocking and mutually supportive refugee regimes likely presents the best option for us to keep asylum alive. And I welcome your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Professor Hathaway, for this very, very clear analysis of the issue and of the possible ways to overcome this problem. I have a question, but maybe I would like to give the floor first to other speakers, to all of you who want to intervene. You are free to take the floor for concerning the, of course, the speech made by Professor Hathaway, but also in general terms concerning what we have so far discussed. So I recognize Tonio Borg, then Violetta, and then Maria for the moment, and then you. Okay. Tonio, please. I think there is a
microphone coming.
Thank you for your insight and which you shared with us. And you mentioned burden sharing, and I would like to share some of my thoughts on burden sharing because I was Minister of the Interior for my sins, of course, and Minister of Foreign Affairs during the period when there was this migratory flow towards European countries, particularly the South, Greece, Italy, Malta, etc.
Yep.
And I remember that the biggest argument against burden sharing from our European, on a regional level, from our European colleagues was one. Burden sharing could be a pull factor. If we have a burden sharing system, then more migrants will come to the European shores because they know that once they land in Malta or in Sicily, they will be distributed towards the other European countries. Now, I always counter this argument that with burden sharing or without, these people are so desperate that once they have crossed over to Libya, and then from Libya crossed over to Sicily or to Malta, they will cross over to Europe as well. The second argument for doing nothing, of course, is that we are not used to the migration problem in the north. Now they are used to it because but at that time we are not used to it, as if we in the south were used to it. You have to learn. And then there is the other problem that even when finally the EU started introducing some burden sharing mechanisms with very limited capacity, some member states, a few, actually resisted the idea even once it was approved. And something which works against the peripheral states is also the Dublin Convention. So what is happening is that the southern states will release the migrants if they are not entitled to protection. They will, with the Schengen, it's easier to roam over Europe because the internal border control does no longer exist except on a very random basis. Once caught, they are sent back to the original state which they entered. They are released again. They go again to France and Germany in this eternal human ping pong.
Right.
Okay? These are the actual problems which I encountered from a political level at that time in my previous existence.
I understand, and it's difficult to know where to begin with all of this. So the Dublin regime, to my mind, has been a disaster from the beginning. The idea that people should be allocated like bales of wheat is unconscionable, and the way it was initially administered before courts intervened was simply flagrantly unlawful. That said, the problem with the EU experiment And by the way, I insist on a dichotomy between responsibility sharing, meaning people, and burden sharing, meaning money. The EU, of course, melded the two together, and they came up with a horrible formula that made no sense, based simply on GDP and population. If you were to look at the work, for example, of Oxfam that came up with a dramatically more sophisticated formula that would have worked much better, it would have made a difference. But the key thing is you can't do burden and responsibility sharing in the middle of a crisis. This is like an insurance policy. You don't buy insurance when your house is on fire. You need to have this in place before that occurs. And whatever concerns we have about the inter-European sharing are a tiny grain of sand on the beach compared to the global level. Because that is where the chaos ensues from us effectively dumping refugees into most of the world's poorest states with little, if any, obligation to them. So I guess what I'm suggesting is, if Europe actually believes, if politicians actually believe, as they seem to suggest, that it's critical to provide local solutions to refugees so that they are disinclined to need to take difficult steps to move farther afield, then they better get with it. Because right now, with no global responsibility and burden sharing regime, the ability of those states to do the job that Europe, America, Australia, and others intend them to do is non-existent. It's going to fail.
Violetta, please.
Thank you, thanks. I have a question and a comment. Thanks a lot for your talk. I had a question on the global burden sharing program that you're proposing in financial terms, if I understood, because the European Union is already trying to do that, right? So there's been a transfer of money, like serious money, going to Turkey into a refugee facility since the 2015 refugee crisis, as it was called. There's another one going to Libya in the form of a trust fund, right, with very few strings attached. And now the UK, it's innovating and it's going to do the same thing with Rwanda. So these transfers already exist. I mean, are these the examples that you had in mind? Or
these are antithetical to everything I believe in and do not remotely speak to burden or responsibility sharing. When Europe bought off Turkey for 6 billion euros and basically left them dumped there, when people are sending refugees back into Libyan jails, when the United Kingdom wants to dump people in a country that admits that it hasn't got the capacity to process, much less to protect them, this is burden shifting. It has nothing to do with sharing. And in my comments, and again, you know, in a 30-minute talk, and trying to focus on 4 decades of work is very hard. But I have always insisted that any transfers of funds are contingent on verifiable respect for all refugee convention rights. That includes freedom of movement, the ability to work, to educate children, and otherwise. What I'm saying is I think we can play a support role in a way that is not threatening to the developed North by actually incentivizing in a very concrete way compliance with refugee rights, not in the places where we are dumping people, but where they already are anyway. More than 3/4 of them would have been there without flights out of the United Kingdom or ships going back to Libya. So that's the reality I am worried about. I'm worried about the fact that we depend on the Global South to do virtually all of the work, and it gets essentially no guarantee of anything, either human or financial, from the rest of us. We get whatever we're in the mood to give on a given day, which tends to ebb and flow with our political and social priorities.
Okay.
So you and I are on the same page with that one.
Okay. I mean, I have another question/comment, because I'd like to hear your thoughts about the need to move towards a more realistic position, as you put it. Because I think we've already moved there. I mean, at least in Europe and North America, there is consensus across the political spectrum that we need to be realistic when it comes to immigration and refugee
Screens
policy.
back up. I just want to put the screens back up, if I could, please, so I can speak to Violetta's point.
Right. And so what I was wondering is, I mean, in a world where there isn't really any political opposition to the realism that we are in, advocating for further realism, I think there's the risk of an eternal regression back to a lack of standards, right? And so there will be no further possibility to avoid the law being used to empty the legal entitlements that at least are written into treaties and so on. Let me just finish, because I was thinking, so if we move beyond the ideal or the absolutist position that you've mentioned, and we abandon that as a reference point, I think, so abandoning our principled position, where law is distinct from policy, the risk is that both become indistinguishable and blurred forever. So I think that advocating a move towards further realism, it's not a good position. I mean, the law should provide a normative standard point of aspiration to which we should strive to arrive. And I think abandoning that position is very risky, because then it means that you give in, you abandon the ideal.
I don't think it does mean that, but we agreed on the first point, and we have always disagreed on the second, and we will continue to do so. So I recognize that, and I said to you, I come to this with a heavy heart. There is no need for us to have ended up here. If we had had an intelligent leadership during the Syrian movement that would have capitalized upon the interest in Europe and actually doing something about refugees rather than a tragically bureaucratic response, I think we need not have ended up here. But I think that opportunity is not going to come again in my lifetime. It may in yours, but I think even that is doubtful. What I'm suggesting is not abandoning the Refugee Convention as a reference point. Good God. I mean, I spent my life writing about this. UNHCR actually, at a recent meeting, referred to me as the evangelist for the Refugee Convention. I think they thought they were insulting me, but I actually felt quite proud. So I do not believe that at all. It is the reference point. That's why I'm so upset about the fact that they're not even trying to get states to come on board with any practical incentivize. That said, I think it's incumbent on all of us who have committed our lives to refugee protection to recognize that right now, absolutism is resulting in dead asylum seekers. It is not resulting in quality protection. It is not resulting in access, a word that, by the way, is completely missing from the global compacts. UNHCR seems scared of that word. What I'm suggesting is that we retain the reference points, but look at what's on the screen. There's nothing here that moves away from the Refugee Convention. To the contrary, it says that third plank may not be done as perfectly as I believe it should have been done, but we need to move toward progress on the third operational plank. A definition and rights aren't good enough if there's no framework within which meaningfully to implement them. So if we disagree, it's only at the level of strategy, it's not at the level of principle, because I will never abandon the Refugee Convention. I believe it is an extraordinarily intelligent treaty. It works well, it is not anachronistic, and if people had put their minds to it and their shoulders to the wheel, we would not be in this mess.
Thank you so much, and thank you for actually making it so very, very clear so that nobody can actually suggest that they cannot understand what it is that we are talking about. I have a sense, however, that there is a recent trend to move towards a certain reading of your third point here, the commitment to enhance extra-regional resettlement, towards a more cherry-picking approach, if you like. I see a movement towards lawful migration I'm not confusing the refugee protection with migration. I'm using the words knowingly. Lawful migration, why? Because in North America you did have the experience, you do have the experience, but in Europe we really have almost no lawful means to move in, isn't it? So this kind of lawful migration would be one way. Temporary protection, the Ukrainian example, would be another way, in which effectively you pick and choose which type of refugees you would like to protect or not. Is that something that we can move towards as a second best or even a third best?
Sure. So let's take the ground reality. Right now, resettlement is completely optional, and if you are worried about cherry picking, spend a little time in a UNHCR operation that is working with countries to figure out who gets resettled. There is nothing but cherries getting picked, right? That's the reality we're starting from. The United States, Canada, and others that are lauded for what they did and have done have cherry-picked forever. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to do more on this front rather than less, and that it is a valid contribution to human protection. When you've got 3/4 of the world's refugees in protracted refugee situations, waiting on average 20 years, that to me is at least as valid, and quite frankly, in a global north-south perspective, probably more valuable than putting people through determination processes that cost 25,000 euros or so to run, rather than actually using that same money to resettle a number of people who have been waiting a long time for a solution. So, you know, could there be a risk of cherry picking? Yes. But that's where we're starting. It's not going to be any worse than it is right now. We dipped below 100,000 refugees resettled in the world, in the whole world. Less than 1% of the protracted refugee situation got resettled in the last couple of years. So all I'm suggesting is we begin thinking more about this as an active way that the developed world, farther away from protection sites, can dependably and meaningfully contribute to the human dimension of refugee protection. I think it is an undervalued tool of protection. It's treated as an immigration system. It should not be. It is a protection tool. And I think that the work that has challenged that facile immigration system mentality is very valid and very helpful. So that's all I'm going to say. I'd love to talk about temporary protection. Just so we're clear, all protection under the Refugee Convention is protection for duration of risk. That's why we have Article 1C5. So the idea that refugee protection is immigration is wrong. Article 34 only asks states to give good faith consideration to naturalization. It does not require them to. So I am more worried about making sure that everybody who cannot survive their current situation is given meaningful access to rights regarding protection than I am about treating refugees as permanent migrants. Again, I know we may disagree on this, but I'm a human rights lawyer, I'm not a migration lawyer.
Jim, thank you so much. That was
Sure.
a really interesting presentation and one that gave us a lot of food for thought.
That's an adjective that makes me nervous, Elspeth, when you say it's interesting. I know you're going to hit me now.
What I want to ask you is whether you could widen your political and theoretical framing, because you've made two references. One is to a statement by a Danish politician who has been convicted of racial discrimination against asylum seekers by her own parliament in an extraordinary procedure. And that's the only political reference you've given us. The only academic reference you've given us is a so-called human rights expert who in 2003 suggested the legalization of torture as the lesser evil to deal with extraordinary rendition. Now, those two frameworks seem to me to be rather narrow as the foundation for your rather pessimistic presentation of where we are, and I wondered whether you could enlarge.
So let's, I think you mischaracterized Michael Ignatieff's advocacy, but you and I can discuss that privately. I don't believe he said that, and his book is really quite thought-provoking for many of us. When he argues that the normative consensus that's actually shared across cultures is thinner than the international human rights regime might suggest, I think we're quite stupid if we don't pause and ask whether he might be right. I'm not suggesting he is 100% right, but I don't have much time for advocacy that simply buries its head in the sand and says that someone like Ignatieff, who's spent 30 or 40 years working on this and who spent his life focused on human rights, simply can be ignored because he suggests something that moves us away from orthodoxy. I just think that's not right. I think he did not take that extreme position. And I gave you the example of the politician, as I said, that this was an extreme version. But I suspect that all of us who've spent time in the corridors of power have heard comments, perhaps not with that level of vitriol, but comments that suggested similar xenophobia and a lack of determination to implement a truly need-based, globalized admissions process for all people who are at risk of being persecuted. I have heard that even in very good states. I've heard that in places like New Zealand and Canada and elsewhere that are lauded for their records. I won't even begin to describe some of the things I've heard in states that are less inclined. My suggestion then is simply that, this is not, and I think this is where we need, at a minimum, to move right now. I've already put on the table a proposal to go dramatically farther than this. I'd love us to go there. But it failed, I think, for a fairly simple reason: a lack of political will to make it happen. And I've suffered for that, as I suspect you have in your work. And my suggestion is that we owe it both to ourselves, but more importantly to the refugees that we care about, to find some way in a crappy political environment where the UN Refugee Agency has essentially sold out the protection reform program, to do something concrete that creates at least some opportunities for more refugees around the world, not just the ones we see, but the 85% we don't see, to benefit from the rights to which we're all committed. Now, I'm not suggesting that my program is the program. Professor Cataldi asked me to share some thoughts on what I thought might work in order to provoke all of us to go down that road. All that I'm asking, please, is that we not propose something that is either so trite that it just amounts to reaffirmation of everything we've said for 50 years that hasn't worked. We have to come up with something that delivers, or else all we're doing is making ourselves feel good and delivering nothing to refugees. And that worries me.
Okay, thank you. I have a more practical question.
That was pretty practical.
Yeah. And it's related to what Violetta asked earlier. About enhancing refugee protection through funding of states hosting refugees. How do you envision the system? I mean, who will manage the money? The donor states, the recipient states, UNHCR, and just a small comment. Okay, let me a little bit be more idealistic. Okay, I understand your pragmatic, let's say, approach, but I believe that there are some limits to enhancing refugee protection through funding. We can resolve the problems through funding, and we're really strong.
Do you want to say something about what they are, just so I know what you're referring to?
I had also my EU trust funds and stuff like that with my experience, but since I also heard that you question a little bit the role of UNHCR in your initial speech, and I had some questions how will the system work if we're not supposed to give the money to the states themselves to handle in order to avoid the corruption or misspending, and if it's supposedly we can trust UNHCR, but to what extent? Yeah.
Yeah. So a colleague from the Max Planck Institute and I led an initiative at the end of last 6 months of last year to look at other models to actually oversee the funds. And I'll provide the references to Professor Cataldi so that you can read them. They're extremely detailed, but it basically involves interstate mechanisms with both refugee and NGO participation on the allocation mechanism. In the best of all worlds, this would have been UNHCR. It's what I proposed 25 years ago. But UNHCR doesn't like to get its hands dirty if it actually has to say that somebody is or isn't in compliance. It makes them nervous. They'd rather hand out tents and blankets and do other things that are non-controversial that keep the money flowing and their prestige intact. So I don't think we're going to get that. I think we're going to have to move outside of UNHCR, as much as I regret that. But I also agree with you and with Violetta that the idea of state-to-state or EU-to-state mechanisms are not ideal. It's not what we should be doing. It leads to the kind of favoritism that has been endemic to the refugee support regime from the beginning. So I've always advocated a globalized mechanism. I would have preferred it be the UN agency, but with that not being possible at present, I think some of these other models of interstate with NGO and refugee participation, to keep them honest, are about as good as we can get.
Thank you, Professor Bradenmore. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your thoughts, which I did not only found very interesting, but I like them very, very much. But I have now some questions, very short questions.
Sure.
I didn't hear of you the word pragmatic. Is it right that we can summarize your thoughts as pragmatic thoughts, not absolute propositions, dogmatic propositions, and not only realistic propositions, but a pragmatic way? And when we see a pragmatic way, then we think perhaps on, yes, you mentioned leadership. Who should take the leadership? Right. This you didn't mention. Is it the United Nations? Is it in Europe the European Union? Is it the European Council, or in other regions, other councils? Or also the NGOs? And when we see these ways of organizations, then we also ask what is the basic of law, not only conventions, not only customary law as you mentioned it, but soft law. What is your approach to soft law, and can we not learn from the environmental law that we see that in this area we made quite a few progresses with soft law, which by time is hardening, so that the member states of the organizations are ready not to make conventions, but
sure.
they are, because they are in the beginning not binding, to sit together and to have a consensus on principles which are in the beginning soft law, but with practice and with the time are becoming hard law, customary law, and even perhaps conventional law. What would you think about these questions directed to you? Thanks very much.
We're getting into more theoretical territory, but I'll two labels that have been thrown at me that I actually embrace. One is that I'm a principled pragmatist. And so, for example, nothing that you see on the screen erodes anything in the Refugee Convention. That's non-negotiable. There are certain things that are non-negotiable, and respect for the Refugee Convention and relevant international human rights is non-negotiable for me. Within that framework, I try to find ways to get states to see their self-interest differently. I don't mind saying the word self-interest to a state if it will get them to do something good for a refugee in need. And I believe that that is the way to pursue protection that is neither opportunistic, expedient, but which is not just high and mighty principles that never deliver on the ground. The other label that's been thrown at me that I response to your second, more theoretical question is I'm happy, along with Bruno Sima, to be thought of as a modern positivist. I think positivism is highly underrated. Modern positivism means we take on board the critical insights from critical legal theory, feminist theory, and otherwise, but rules matter. I think when we move into a realm where law and politics are the same, what we get is politics. And that's not helpful to the human rights cause. And so, at the risk of offending you and probably half the room simultaneously, the line I use with my students is that soft law is a little bit like being half pregnant. It doesn't exist. These are political projects, and if you want to call them political projects, just call them that. And if and when they have the imprimatur of law, and those are the rules of recognition in the Vienna Convention and elsewhere, then we have something that is qualitatively distinct and which is an additional tool to the political weight that the argument might have had absent that rule of recognition. I don't want to simply throw away the value of law by treating it as just a subset of politics. I don't see any net value to desperate people in that.
Just a very quick question from myself. When you have told us about the second point, non-accession 1951 convention, and you also mentioned some of the countries who are supposed not to accede also in the future. But how is the possibility to, in a certain way, resolve this problem through customary law, saying that 1951 convention, most of the rules codified in 1951 convention now are consistent with customary law. For example, concerning the rule of non-refoulement, commonly it is said that now corresponds to a rule of customary law, so it is self-applicable to all states. Do you believe in this perspective or not?
No. I mean, I think it's just wrong. With a wobble in the Nicaragua case, the World Court has made clear that the two elements, consistent state practice and opinio juris, are not the same. When people double count what states say as both opinio juris and practice, all we end up with is political statements being treated as though they're binding. It doesn't change anything on the ground. All of this blathering on about non-refoulement being customary law flies in the face of, I think there were 35 pages in the most recent edition of My Rights of Refugees cataloging instances of refoulement by states over the last decade. So anybody who pretends that there is consistent state practice, custom is about negotiating through practice rather than words. If you're going to negotiate through words, you use a treaty. If you're going to use a treaty, then you need accession. The fact that we then try to pretend that a quarter of the world's states that have steadfastly refused to sign are somehow bound by something not of their making because a lot of people mouth platitudinous words at conferences just strikes me as politically offensive to those states. So I don't believe that is, and it produces no practical results. Outside of the Hong Kong court is the only jurisdiction I can think of that has actually relied on custom to create a binding result for refugees in terms of accessing protection. So let's just stop the BS. I think we need to get serious about what law is. This goes back to the earlier question. If we are going to argue that law is nothing more than politics, then quite frankly, I'll throw in the towel, because I want to have both tools. If we can get there politically, that's great. But if we have a legal tool at our disposal where we can actually harness the power, in particular of national courts, which have been the heroes over the last 30 years. National and regional courts have done more good than UNHCR and academics combined. Those need the additional leverage that law provides. And I'm not willing to give up on that for some flimsy claim that produces no practical results.
Thank you. There is one more question. Yes, please. Where is the microphone? No, it's better because also we have some.
Okay, thank you very much for this really interesting, really provocative talk as well, but thought-provoking and provocative. You have initially made a diagnosis of what's the problem we are confronted with, and you named 3 problems. And the first one was non-entrée, the politics of non-entrée. Exactly. The second, non-accession, and the third, the vague promises of support. I can see how you are addressing with your suggestions, of course, the third one.
Right.
I can see how you might hope that if this third one is solved, the second one will also somehow be solved. But I do not see how your proposals do something to help us with the first problem of non-entrée. And you have repeatedly in your talk mentioned that if we do not become more pragmatic and adopt these kinds of solutions that you're suggesting, more migrants will die. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see it, migrants are dying. Of course, people are dying in their countries of origin, but migrants are dying on the way to the global north because of the politics of non-entrée. And I do not see how a system of burden and responsibility sharing, limited responsibility sharing and more ambitious burden sharing is going to change the fact that people will continue to try to come to those countries where their life chances are simply bigger and better. So I think we'll continue to be confronted with non-entrée and with deaths of migrants. And I would like to ask you, where do you see a kind of positive outlook on that, or how could we get there?
That's a fabulous observation, and it's extraordinarily clear, and I thank you for it. And I think you're right. The hope is that by replacing vague promises of support, the accession rate becomes more viable because states see that they are not effectively mortgaging their future to the unknown, but rather buying an insurance policy that enables them to honor obligations without unacceptable cost. The non-entrée question, again, this is the legalization of barriers to entry despite remaining formally committed to the treaty, is something that the projects that I've put forward over the last decades answers directly. It disaggregates the place of arrival from the place of protection so that states would have no incentive to keep people away if there were no immigration consequences from arrival. That has not gone anywhere. I'm trying to be as hard on me as I am on UNHCR. My proposal has not gone anywhere. That is just true. The next best option, it seems to me, is to make space for protection to occur closer to home and to make opportunities for residual resettlement out of regions of origin part of the regime. I conceded, though, and you've hit the nail on the head. This is not anywhere close to an ideal proposal. I do not like it, quite frankly. If I had the ability to change the politics, I would not be suggesting this. But having worked for decades to do that without success, and having seen the entity that ought logically to be championing these changes put its head in the sand, I think the least bad option is to enhance protection opportunities closer to home and provide resettlement out of difficult places for those who need it on a dependable, more formal basis rather than the cherry picking and discretion that is the case today. But it's not the best answer. I agree with you.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions for Professor Hathaway.
Such a depressing note on which to end.
No, no. I propose another applause for him. Thank you very much. Now some technical suggestion. All of you are invited at 8:30 in front of us, La Bersagliera restaurant near the Castel dell'Uovo. And now you are free, except my colleagues of the 10 universities involved in the program, because we have to deal with some administrative issues. So maybe our last meeting will take place immediately. So please do not go away, please. Tomorrow, please try to be punctual, because tomorrow there will be, yes, a full day of work, but I have organized for you also a very quick visit to the museum, which is downstairs, which is a very little museum, but very, very nice. And we will have a colleague of mine, a specialist in archaeology, who will guide us in this museum, okay? Thank you very much to all of you.
Grazie. I know I was very blunt in the North.